Yesterday was the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, and we're very blessed to have our chapel where so many experience the Lord's closeness and compassion in the Eucharist adoration each day, named after him. And it could be argued among all the saints, we glimpse in Francis's life a man who was literally in love with God. You know, that kind of in love, head over heels, that makes you do sort of little crazy things. And so in some ways, so many of the events of Francis's life, stories, have formed the imagination of believers to this day. In fact, his brothers compiled these stories in a book that's titled The Little Flowers of Francis in the years after his death. And if you ever read this, it's like a combination of Francis just doing radical things, you know, because he loved so strongly. But then there's always this note of lightness and humor to make a point, you know. So among my favorite is when Francis is walking through the Italian countryside with Brother Leo. It's maybe a little hard to picture, but it's winter, it's really cold, it's starting to sleet, and they haven't eaten all day, and it's getting dark. And it's at this moment that Francis asks Leo, what constitutes the source of true joy? And even before Leo can respond, Francis says, it can't be successes. We've had those, and we know that doesn't do it. It can't be something as fickle as the esteem of other people, which can come and go. And so for however long, Francis walks Leo through this whole list, even of really good things, like your abilities that can bless other people, or your eloquence, or your understanding, or even your works, like he even says miracles. At a certain point, Brother Leo is just exasperated, where is Francis going now? And Francis says, Brother Leo, this is the source of true joy. It would be if we get to this friary this evening, cold, hungry. Mind you, all the friaries Francis founded, his brothers, and we knock on the door, and not only do they not let us in, but they insult us and even beat us up. Brother Leo, that's the source of true joy. Now maybe you're sitting there thinking, I knew Francis was crazy. Well, what's he talking about? He said, Leo, if we can in that moment, without complaining, bear that because of what Jesus did, and we know that in us, then we are the freest, joyful, most happy people in the world. No longer does our joy consist on circumstances that I can't control, even though I try to sometimes, or anticipate them. No longer is it based on my own strength. I've told you, I thought I'm coming up on a milestone birthday, 50. And if you would have asked me when I started as a priest, I would have thought I would have been a lot holier right now. I would have thought I would have been more virtuous. Well, should I be sad? Can I be joyful? I want to say this as a way that I think helps us understand this gospel parable. I would say we've had a run on parables where Jesus is really provoking us, isn't he? If you're listening even mildly, you're like, wait a minute, that kind of stings. And by the way, who even has servants anymore? But we take the role of servants in the parable. And he says, is the servant supposed to come in and just say, hey, I've done my part. Now it's time for me to chow. It's time for me to be served. I think Jesus is trying to invite us to guard against that part of our heart that would turn our faith, our relationship with him, into something transactional. I think all of you who are married, but even those of you who aren't, you know this. When you start living your relationship on the transactional level, it drains all love and joy. And we can do that with God. Sometimes we actually vocalize it in prayer, but sometimes it's just our attitude. Okay, God, I'm doing my part. I'm keeping the commandments. I'm getting my family to church. I'm saying my prayers. What's in it for me? I'd at least expect, to respond in this way or that way. And before you know it, you're like, wait, who's the creator and who's the creature? Sometimes we begin our staff prayer just praying together with the scripture that we're going to hear on this Sunday. My staff actually just loves small group reflections, so we just reflect on it. And Deacon John had this great insight. He said, this parable is like a reset for me. It's like a reset. Why am I doing the things I'm doing spiritually? Is it all subtly part of some grand bargain with God? Like bargaining, Come on, Lord. You got to do your part. Or am I doing it because I love the Lord? Because He's worthy. He's more than worthy. I don't have my next breath unless He holds me in existence. And by the way, He died for me. And I'm so taken by that I want to live my life a completely different way. This happens very subtly in our own life. One of my priest mentors, he became a dear friend. He died a year and a half ago. Father Jeff. Father Jeff shared when he was on a retreat some years ago. And by the way, it's church law that priests have to leave their people to go be with God once a year. That should tell us something, huh? To keep that fire. But he heard the Lord speak so clearly to him on this retreat. And it was full of love, but conviction. And the Lord said, Jeff, you used to love me. Now you just work for me. And he said that was a great grace for him, that the Lord would speak that to him. Because it had been true. Think about it. We can drift off center in so many ways. We can complain. We can go to self-pity. We can play the comparison game, which is endless rabbit hole. Whenever our relationship with God becomes transactional and I start bargaining, you better be careful, because it usually ends up in entitlement. It's the servant who comes in and says, now it's my turn to be waited on. I did my part, So I want to just hold before you bargaining versus offering in love. Versus offering. Some of you are of a generation, you know this so well because you heard it. It was in your DNA, your bones, where people would say, offer it up, and you didn't need to ask them what they meant by that. It meant that whatever you were going through, you could live positively because it can be united to Him and what He's done for you. Anything. The thing that people don't understand, the insults, whatever you're going through can be lived positively. It doesn't mean we'll do it all the time. It just means because of what Jesus has done, His suffering and His death has changed every life, every suffering, every death. Some years ago, my teaching parish seminarian at the time, very earnest fella, still is. He's a great priest. He's at the Newman Center at the U of M. And he asked me 2 weeks before he was going to get ordained, Father Peter, what's the hardest thing about being a priest? I didn't have to think. The answer was easy. Me. Me. I would think that everyone in their vocation, with some honesty, could answer that. The problem's not my spouse, it's not my children, it's not my circumstances. Is that my heart is not right when I experience sacrifice. And so instead of offering, I just go into coping mode. And then I just kind of get dragged along, and my attitude sort of, dissipates. Think about Francis, what he told Leo. He believed with his heart, he knew it from experience, that Jesus said the night before he did this, for you, not generally, for you, that my joy would be in you, and that your joy would be full, and that no one would take your joy away from you. So sometimes it's very simple. When I'm heavy, when I'm listless, when I'm wrapped in my own disappointment and sadness or complaining, it's just a matter of asking, Lord, is my heart right here? Is this possible to live this with you and positively as an affair of love? So just the encouragement, life is full of sacrifice. And that sacrifice doesn't mean you chose the wrong spouse. It doesn't mean I chose the wrong vocation. It's just full of sacrifice. So what? Is there love in the sacrifice? Is there the strength of Jesus' love? Do you know the second reading Paul's writing to Timothy? From prison? I mean, the ultimate, poor me. I was just preaching the gospel and now I'm in prison. Would you have any hint from what he wrote that he's just sitting in prison? He's telling Timothy, stir into flame the Spirit. Power, self-control. I better wrap this up, but I can never preach to you unless it first goes through my heart. And the last few weeks hasn't necessarily been easy, Sometimes as a pastor, you'd like for everyone to like you and to think you're doing a good job. And that's okay, That's good. I'd rather have that than the opposite. But then when it gets hard, I don't know, I was in these encounters where I could feel in my spirit, I don't know what I was saying. I think I did that fine, but I was trying to defend myself to myself. And then at a certain point, I came across again this story of Francis to Leo. And it was just a reconversion experience for me. To say, this is joy. I don't need to fall apart in this place. Where's my foundation? The esteem of others? The approval? My own ingenuity, eloquence? What is it? It's that. That's the only firm foundation, is his love for me on the cross, that allows me and you to live everything in our life as offering with great freedom, even joy. So let's ask for this grace today through the intercession of St. Francis. Wherever it is, I'm in complaining mode. Maybe that becomes the place where I begin to relate and to dialogue with Jesus.